Good morning.
Good morning, Tom.
I'm Tom Gardner, a volunteer in the Storage Special Interest Group at the Computer History Museum, and I'm here today to talk to Peter Faulhaber, who is the you're the CEO of Fuji, aren't you?
President and CEO.
President. Okay, I misread your resume in front of me.
No, I'm not sure whether you got the latest version of my resume. So.
Oh, that's a storage problem, which is really what we're here to talk about, the storage industry from the tape perspective, given Peter's many years in the industry. Peter, please tell us a little bit about your background.
Good morning, Tom, first of all.
Good morning again.
Maybe my resume is not updated to the latest stage. When you get a certain age, you don't always update your resume. I'm in the storage industry more than almost now 25 years now, and really enjoy, where we are going. I'm married, have 2 children. My family lives actually. As you can tell, I'm from Germany. Live in Germany. My family lives in Germany. I now live for the last 16 years in New York, working for FUJIFILM. Before that, I worked for BASF, and BASF transitioned into EMTEC. And in 2004, I joined FUJIFILM as a VP of OEM Business Development. And in 2012, I became the president of FUJIFILM U.S.A., FUJIFILM Recording Media U.S.A.
Where were you born?
I'm born in Germany.
Oh, where?
I'm born in, let's say, in the middle of Germany, in a small town called Zweibrücken.
Okay. And your parents and grandparents?
My parents, my father born in the Palatinian area of Germany, my mother actually in a town called Gleiwitz, which now these days is part of Poland. So she, moved in 1945 during World War II to a place called Wolfsburg, famous for Volkswagen. That's where my parents met eventually, and then they moved back, south.
And their parents?
And their parents, again, my mother's side in Gleiwitz, and my father's side all in the Palatinian area originally from.
Okay. The reason I ask is sometimes when relatives are going to listen to this oral history, they might not know that information, particularly your grandchildren. So having it recorded permanently someplace is my gift to your grandchildren.
Thank you.
Okay. Where would you like to start?
Where would you like to start? History.
Well, let's start with how did a person of an accounting background rise to the level of president of a German person of an accounting background, arrive to the level of the president of an American subsidiary of a Japanese company that's one of the 2 surviving companies in the magnetic tape business? What were the seminal events that happened to you during that 25-year transition? And briefly, we can go into more detail.
I have a finance background and started with BASF on the finance side. Actually, was an auditor for a while, did mergers, acquisitions, and then transferred to a division within BASF in 1992 to a division for the magnetic tape business. And we separated, we split the company into BASF bought in 1992 the Agfa activities from Agfa, the magnetic tape activities from Agfa, and built a new company called BASF Magnetics in 1992. In 1993, I was responsible in 1992 for implementing SAP. In 1993, I became the controller, the controller of the company of BASF Magnetics. And in 1996, they offered me the position as the head of the business unit data storage. So that's how I moved into the business side. And I believe that people with a finance background are able to run a business better because they better understand numbers. They have a better idea about strategy. It's not about just colors like marketing. Here are somebody who understands top-line revenue and the impact to bottom-line profitability and run this business. So that's what I did in 1990, started in 1996. So that was a time which became a little bit of a turbulence because in 1997 BASF decided to sell the company, or the core business, to BASF as a chemical company, and they sold it to a Korean company called Faulhaber. Now, Faulhaber was running this business for probably a year or so, and then the Korean crisis started in 1997, 98, and the company actually was sold to an investor. It was a leverage buyout. Certain number of companies, LGV in England, an English company, leverage buyout, and that was, I would almost say, the start from the ending. That's how the whole business ended, because our management at that time was a marketing guy, the CEO, and the CEO was a production guy. They didn't really understand. They were happy that they got a lot of money and it was valued very high, but the high value at the end of the day had to be paid back with projected profitability, which never came really. And the reason why, because the market changed dramatically. Number one, the company BASF Magnetics was relying heavily on tape, especially VHS, video tape for consumer, the VHS cassettes, audio cassettes, but also for duplicator tape. There was a lot of duplicators like Technicolor and Deluxe who duplicated video. And that was, I would say, the majority of the business. Now, with the leverage buyout and the new investor, we had to change all the brand names, and we moved from BASF, we transitioned from BASF brand name to EMTEC. What was always this very famous spiral BASF created, because BASF, as you might know, is and was the inventor of magnetic tape. 1932, audio tape, and the interesting part is how magnetic tape became, went around the world, was that World War II, Hitler gave a speech in Munich, and at the same time he gave a speech in Berlin. And now the Allies, the Americans thought, how can that happen? That Hitler is at the same time in Berlin and in Munich, but what happened is the speech was recorded. So they became aware of the audio tape, and they took this invention and gave it to 3M. That's how this invention actually became into the hands of 3M and the Americans, like many other technologies. But going back to the leverage buyout with EMTEC, we could not, I think technically, with just audio and video tape in mass production, we did not really foresee in the future. In the future at that time, what was killing the video tape was optical disc. Now optical came and people thought, it certainly, killed the VHF business and the consumer business. Now, long story short, we could not pay the bills, and EMTEC had to declare, Chapter 11 in 2003, January 2003. The part of the business I was running, the data storage business, was small but profitable, and I proposed a management buyout. I did a management buyout. I found an investor running around in Europe, looking for investors. We had an investor, and I engaged Fujifilm as a strategic supplier. Fujifilm at that time was a supplier and a customer of ours. So I had good contact with Fujifilm, and I engaged Fujifilm as a strategic supplier. Now the investor came and said, at a certain point in our negotiation, and said, Fujifilm has to guarantee the exit strategy, which means 3 years later, the investor wants to get out with 25%, margin. And Fuji said, if that's the case, we don't need the investor, we are jumping in. So that's how we engaged with FUJIFILM. The management buyout eventually, falls through because Imation got the business awarded, and they bought the assets, especially at that time the assets were 3480 and 90, and the manufacturing of 3590. So Imation bought all these assets, and Fuji offered me a job in the United States. So I came to the United States as a VP OEM development with all my contacts, and I must have done well. They promoted me several times, and I ended up, becoming in 2012 the president of the company.
So EMTEC fundamental business was video recording. It was dying. You had this profitable, smaller computer tape business. You tried to do a leverage buyout and it didn't happen?
So the leverage buyout was for the entire company at that time. And the company, more or less had three divisions. We had a data storage, we had a broadcast business, and we had video, VHS.
That was 2003.
That was, at 2003, that was the status quo at 2003 when they filed Chapter 11.
Okay. But I thought you said you would try to do
I did a management buyout.
A management
not
buyout,
a leverage
and it
buyout,
did
a
not.
management. The management buyout, we went very well. We made an offer to the creditors, the administrator at that time, in July 2003, and we were bidding against Imation. The creditors and the administrator at the end took the Imation offer because it was an existing company here. I had my own startup. I started my own company and bid it, as you recorded, I think an amount in around 50 million at that time, and they took the Imation offer.
Some of the seminal events while you were now in Fuji that led to your current success. Tell me about them.
What do you mean? What specifically you have in mind?
I don't know much about what happened to you in Fuji from 2004 to present, but there must have been some things that were remarkable to you that you were involved in.
I would say that in general, when I came to Fujifilm, and I have to be careful how I word this, it was heavily loaded Fuji branded business. Fuji was very successful in DLT. Fuji came to the company, and that is before my time. Fuji was involved in floppy disk. Fuji was involved in VHS. Fuji was pretty much similar structure than EMTEC or BASF before. They had the floppy disk business, which was more or less, the floppy business was everything they had in data storage at that time. They developed a technology, they call it the atom technology. It was based on metal particle. It was a successor of chromium dioxide. BASF was everything we did within BASF on 3480 and 90 in data storage was based on chromium dioxide, very famous. BASF was actually manufacturing one of the two manufacturers of chromium dioxide. DuPont was the other manufacturer, which they went out of business in 2001, DuPont. So everything was based on chromium dioxide. MP was the successor of chromium dioxide, and Fujifilm developed a so-called atom technology with metal particle. The success of that was that they were able to support formats like DLT and SIP, the iOmega 100 megabyte floppy disk, and DLT4, very famous 40 gigabyte at that time, and very, very successful in the market. At that time, we divided the market into classic and an enterprise mid-range and a consumer market. In the consumer market were floppy disk. In the mid-range, you had products like DLT, quarter-inch cartridges, AIT, and in the enterprise market, purely 3480 and 90, and a little bit of open reel at that time. Now, Fuji's atom technology was the enabler of DLT. DLT then, the success of DLT triggered LTO. A consortium was founded between Certens, IBM, and HP to start the so-called LTO format, the Linear Tape Open Consortium, with 3 companies. An open format, everybody was able to participate. It was no limitation in terms of IPs. And so LTO became successful. LTO actually took over the DLT market faster than anybody thought. When I joined FUJIFILM in 2004, DLT was declining dramatically and LTO took over the market. FUJIFILM was, at that time there was hardly any OEM business. OEM business means private label to the original equipment manufacturers. It was mainly the branded products from the manufacturers, the media manufacturers. And Fuji was the major player. We had a market share of, I would say with Fuji brand, about 50% market share overall in DLT, if not even more. LTO, we were successful in the LTO business with our branded products, major and significant market share on LTO as well. But then I remember very well HP changed the market and changed the business behavior, because HP came in and with their strong brand name, they bought from 3 different manufacturers, from Maxell, TDK, and from Sony. And they leveraged they had a huge bargaining power, as you can imagine. I think strong brand name, huge penetration in the market, and they had a pretty significant bargaining power, and they still have. But what happened is they leveraged this, and they drove the market, especially the price down. It was pretty and suddenly HP became a major player in the media business, even though they were not a manufacturer, they were purely an OEM. But they achieved market shares in Europe up to 40% and even higher. And they had pretty significant market share even in the US these days. Very attractive, of course, for media manufacturers to supply to HP. Now, it's not profitable, because if you don't support your own brand, you're not in control of your own destiny. You cannot maintain this business. That's not a sustainable business model. So when I came to FUJIFILM, we hardly had any OEM business. We were relying purely, I would say, on Fuji brand. We haven't really had a strategy. The OEM business just got the leftover. So when I came in and was supposed to be the VP of business development, and shortly after became also the VP of the OEM business, and I questioned the strategy. I purely just questioned the strategy, and I said, I didn't say, what is right or wrong. I said, we need to develop a strategy, and we all have to support the same strategy, and can't just go out of the room and one goes right and the other goes left.
That's a very Japanese way of business management, isn't it? Consensus as opposed to more autocratic.
I totally agree with that. It's the Japanese, very consensus-driven. And as a German, I'm not that patient. That's certainly a challenge working for a Japanese company. But I always said, I'm coming here and support the business as long as they, accept that I'm vocal and raise my voice and question the way we're doing business. And they accepted this, and we were pretty successful. And suddenly, we turned this around. Technically, the Fuji brand business became equal to, or the OEM business came equal to the Fuji brand business, and we suddenly had a strategy. And the strategy was that we clearly maintain our Fuji brand because we are in control of our own destiny, but we also support OEM business. And the way we support OEM business is by selling a value proposition. It's not purely on price. Fuji, and that is, I'm very vocal on this, the value proposition, the service, the quality, the support was always very important to us. And that's how we are successful, because we are reliable, we have capacity, we always can support our OEMs, we never let them down. They can, they get great quality and they create a good service. We also, Fujifilm, we are, one significant advantage we have is we have a US-based manufacturing in Boston, Massachusetts. So we can react quickly to the needs and the upsides in terms of demand and without even forecast. And we are clearly, the leader, Fujifilm, the leader in research and development. We are investing heavily in technology. We are committed to invest in technology, and we were always committed to invest in technology. And so that's part of we are selling a value proposition. It's not short-term optimization, short-term selling. It's about the future.
Now, back in 2003, about the time you moved into Fuji, I think there were 7 tape vendors.
There were, I would say, 5 manufacturers.
I should say manufacturers, not vendors. There
Correct.
were OEM is a big.
There is a little bit misleading. There were 7 or even more brands out in the market, but at that time it was in 2003. It was EMTEC, Imation, Sony, TDK, Maxell, and Fujifilm. So 7 tape manufacturers at that time. Yeah. But several more brands, as you can imagine, came up, with just from a TPC side, you had Quantum, who actually bought Certens. There was a Certens tape out in 2003. There was an IBM, an HP, so Verbatim, Tandberg, several more brands out in the market competing for market shares.
According to my notes, by 2013 it was 5 manufacturers, and today there are 2.
That is true, and it's very unfortunate to some extent, but it's all about investing into the future. So selling at the lowest price, not making money, you cannot invest. I think the business model, and that's where I'm coming in and say, have a finance background, understanding what it takes. You have to earn money. You have to have a bottom line, a profitable bottom line, to be able to reinvest in the business. And that's part of the value proposition I tell my customers too. If you want the lowest price, you don't have a healthy environment. You need a healthy environment, and to support a healthy environment, an environment which is able to support in the future development. Because we cannot, and that's another story we can talk a little later, but think about where we came in the 90s from megabytes. An open reel tape had 200 megabytes, and where we are today, we are the highest cartridge, we have 20,000 megabytes on a single cartridge. We couldn't handle the exponential data growth without R&D and investment in this future technology. And that's where Fuji is, I would say, clearly the leader, and we were always able to invest in the future. Companies, and HP was more or less killing this business model, because companies like TDK and Maxell and even Sony didn't really support their own brand. Especially Maxell and TDK gave up their own brand, more or less, and supported HP, not competing against HP. Now, if you always compete for the last market share and won't try to utilize your production, because the market was also driven by overcapacity. Overcapacity brings price down. Very competitive. you can't. That's not a long-term business model you can survive. You need to enjoy the business. You have to make some money and be able to reinvest. And that was Fuji's business model all along. We are not the cheapest, we sell a value proposition, but we reinvest and we provide a roadmap for the future technologies. That's why I would say EMTEC went out of business, iMation eventually went out of business. They could not keep up with technologies. They could not keep up with the investment it takes to develop new high-density tapes. Maxell eventually couldn't keep up, TDK couldn't keep up. Sony stayed in business because they also had they do have a strong broadcast business, especially hardware, which they have to support with their media. So they had to stay in business to support their broadcast business from the hardware and media perspective, like the Betacam system on the broadcast side, HD Cam SR business. That's what they had to support and why they had to stay in business.
So as the market evolved from 2003, as new generations of drives emerged, you had to qualify new generations of tape. And by investing in the technology, Fuji was able to be on the leading edge and therefore capture the leading edge higher margin tapes than the rest of the guys who were probably cash cowing their existing production.
I couldn't say it better.
Well, I'm not here to give my oral history.
No,
I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
I think there is a significant difference the way we do business and when I came to Fujifilm. And the reason why we went very strong for OEM business, we went specifically very strong with IBM and that actually Quantum, because we had good relations with Quantum from the SDLT side when they actually acquired the Certens portion for the TPC, became a TPC member, because we worked very closely in developing the next generation of tape with the next generation of drive. So LTO had a roadmap out, and I remember when in 1998 the TPCs announced the roadmap for LTO 1 through LTO 4, and it went from 100 gigabyte to 800 gigabyte. I said, we are killing ourselves because technically, we were selling 3480 and 3490 with 200, respectively 800 megabytes. There are a couple of cartridges for the demand for 800 gigabyte. So some companies, their demand was just 800 gigabyte on an annual basis. So I thought we were killing ourselves. I didn't consider really the exponential data growth. But what happened is, and was quite different, at one time when we talk about the old 3480 and 3490 technologies, you more or less independently developed your tape while IBM and the hardware manufacturer developed their drives in parallel. It became more a joint development where all the specifications need to be developed together and see what is possible from a drive and a media perspective at a given time. So it was very important that you work closely with the drive manufacturer, and working closely with IBM certainly gave us an advantage. I think we had a great technology with Atom technology in 2000 and early 2000, which actually enabled LTO1. We were out first to market with LTO1. Fuji was out first with LTO2, LTO3, LTO4 based on their tape development. And we were developed closely with IBM. Being out to the market early means also that you were able, in the beginning, there's no aftermarket because you sell, we call it, the hardware gets sold, bundled with media. That was our strategy. Sell the hardware together, bundled with media. Less of a price pressure early out in the market. That's when you make some money before the market really goes into the shift into the aftermarket, where it's far more competitive and hardly any margin left. That's where we made, we were able to be successful and be able to, invest into the future. And that was our business model. Be early to market, being early where, the price still is high, you made some margin, be able to invest.
There's a couple of things you just said which strikes my curiosity. First of all, you talked about the LTO being open, but it's really not. You have to be licensed. You're not in the consortium. DLT was also not open, but Quantum would license and did, in fact. Fuji was licensed in both technologies.
You raise a good point. Even LTO is not open because you need a license. And the other thing why it's not open is because you had no, as a media manufacturer, no input into their specification and capacity as per se, let's say capacity. So yes, you were able to license, but you could not input, to base into for the specification. So it's not per se an open because you had to license, but anybody who wants and had the capability to manufacture was able to license. Even you could license without having the technology, just getting the specification. DLT was different. DLT was more a closed format, was controlled by Quantum, and Quantum at one point only gave, that's my understanding, the license to Fujifilm and later to Maxell. So Maxell and Fuji were the major manufacturer for DLT. A little later, Sony came in, and iMation actually tried to get in and was never really successful going into the DLT business as a manufacturer.
So is your observation then that by controlling the entrance, Quantum actually committed a business error because their prices then in the aftermarket were higher compared to LTO? Is that part of the reason why LTO ultimately prevailed over DLT?
No, I wouldn't say that. In general, there were different times and different markets and different formats. DLT was very successful in the late 90s, early 2000s, very successful. What they did is they kept the price artificial high. There was no competition. It was a single source. Quantum was the only provider. They could control the market, which was eventually an antitrust issue, actually, what they did, the way they controlled the market and controlled pricing and dictated pricing. Nobody really was able to get in. Everybody was, I remember the dealers got rich by just getting, being part of the distribution of DLT. Many distributors and dealers really got rich at that time. Fuji, was very successful. I believe that Maxell was just as successful as Fuji was and we were able to develop next technologies. There was no DLT. DLT then came more or less late 90s, early 2000. And what, from my perspective, killed DLT, because what Quantum did as the answer to the LTO roadmap, which went up to 800, it was 100 for LTO 1 was 100 gigabyte, LTO was double, LTO 2 was 200, LTO 3 was 400, and LTO 4 was 800 gigabyte per cartridge. Quantum announced so-called SDLT, Super DLT. And the roadmap was SDLT 160 gigabyte per cartridge, and SDLT 2 was 320. Now, the problem Quantum faced mainly was that they were not able to deliver to their promise. You lose credibility in the market. Now suddenly you have a consortium of 3 companies, Certens, HP, and IBM, well known in the industry, versus Quantum. Quantum couldn't deliver to their promise. They were not able to deliver really to 160 gigabyte. They could never really deliver to 320 in time. So you lose credibility, and here is a consortium providing with 7 manufacturers, LTO. So that became, I would say, almost the de facto standard. But I have to say, just de facto. It wasn't standard, it was a de facto standard. It became LTO. And DLT was not successful.
It just died.
Died, correct. And then the other thing is, Quantum, very smart, they recognized that SDLT wasn't successful, they took an opportunity which everybody said, oh, why, I would have done this, but they did it. They bought Certins. And with Certins, they became a TPC member. Now, Quantum suddenly was a member of the TPC consortium, the technology provider companies, LTO, and they had DLT, SDLT. So they were playing both. I'm not sure whether HP and IBM really liked it, but Quantum suddenly became a player in the industry for LTO. And understanding where LTO is going and where DLT, SDLT is going, they, put the money on the horse, the LTO horse.
Now, you mentioned that you have had and still have a close relationship with IBM, who is in the consortium.
Yes.
The other consortium companies have practically, as near as I know, no research going on in tape technology. IBM, I believe, still has some prototype lines where they can do development. But how does that work, that you who have the production are working closely with a company who is in the consortium and you're not? How does that work out from an intellectual property issues? Is that a problem?
No, it's not a problem at all. I think we are working technically closely with all TPC members these days. And the market dramatically shifted, as you said. I think IBM today is the main drive manufacturer. I would say Fuji is the main media manufacturer, and it makes absolute sense that the two, major manufacturer on media and hardware working closely together for next generations.
But the consortium gets the royalty, which you're not a part of.
Yeah, but that's, whether I like it or not, that's a different story, but that's the way it's set up. And so technically, you have to ask IBM whether they are happy in sharing the royalties with the other TPC members, Quantum and HPE now, while HP or IBM is doing the major development. That's a different story. Yeah. The question is, why did Quantum and HPE stop developing hardware drives per se?
And presumably investing in media technology also. As you pointed out, they do go together. There has to be a dialogue. IBM still does media work in the laboratory level.
Not really.
Not really?
No, I don't think. No, IBM is not. Even in a laboratory scale, you need a coder. They do test a lot and know where the direction is going, but they rely on samples from the media manufacturer.
Really? So,
and they do testing with our samples. I'm pretty sure they do testing with Sony samples as well to look where future generations is going. And we do demonstration. We do media demonstration and see, what is capable based on, I would say, areal density. So we are today, as I said, we are commercializing 20 terabyte. Today is 2019. We demonstrated more than 220 terabyte already, together with IBM in a single cartridge. So we can, based on our technology, support any roadmap for the near future, any published roadmap out, we can support.
So the consortium produces the roadmap, which, based upon their analysis, is a reasonable projection of in 2 years or 3 years we ought to be able to double or increase the capacity. You guys have input to that. You tell them whether it's practical or not, but then you're doing your research to stay ahead of that. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is, in a nutshell, yes. But I think it's a little bit more than that. I would say the LTO idea always was to double capacity every 2 to 3 years. So I don't think there is more into that than just, let's say, double. Why? Because the projection is that the exponential data growth, and we see a compound average growth rate of 30 to 35% growth year by year. So to support the exponential data growth, you technically have to double every 2 to 3 years capacity just to handle the data growth. Now, the next question is how to manage this and how to supply and support the roadmap. I would say LTO1, LTO2, 3 were pretty simple. In fact, when LTO3, the roadmap was extended to LTO8. Now the roadmap is extended to LTO12, which goes up native 192 terabyte on a single cartridge. The question is, the development now goes along to say, how can we support the next generation? Now we are now at LTO8, 12 terabyte. We are working now on LTO9 together with IBM and see, what we have to do to achieve LTO9 and up to 24 terabyte. The question is, will it be 24 terabyte or not? It's the question of hardware and media, and there are always challenges, but it's always to overcome the challenges. Fuji, and I said earlier, is committed to tape. Fuji is committed in tape technology. We are committed in R&D, investing into the future. We started, as I pointed out earlier, we started atom technology in the early 2000s, late 1990s, with atom technology based on metal particle. We then developed nanocubic technology. Nanocubic is still on metal particle, but what it is, it's smaller particles. That's nanotechnology. Because you need smaller particles in order to achieve higher density. Higher density means higher signal-to-noise ratio, means higher capacity. In 2006, we came and developed, which we developed much earlier, but we started commercializing in 2006 barium ferrite. So we replaced metal particles with barium ferrite particles. Why did we do this? The main reason is you can smaller particles with barium ferrite. If you get metal particles too small, they lose their magnetic signal strength. That's what you need, for write-read, you need the magnetic signal strength. Particles get too small, they lose the magnetic signal strength. You can't store the capacity. So you need smaller particles to achieve a higher density. Barium ferrite, a perfect example with how you can get smaller particles with higher density and accomplish higher capacity. And that's not the end, what we're doing. We are currently developing a new particle to replace eventually barium ferrite with a so-called strontium ferrite particle. Again, same magnetic property, smaller particles. You can have strontium ferrite even smaller than barium ferrite particles to achieve, again, higher capacity. So that's where Fujifilm is working on. That's not history, that's future.
As you described it, Fuji went through a transition just prior to your joining it, when the business went from a consumer retail business mainly to a enterprise computer tape business. Transitions like that are generally very difficult companies. They mostly fail. Kodak being a great example. And you guys survived. As an observer, not there, can you tell me something about that transition? Key decisions, key players, key events?
Let's start with with product and technology. So the way Fuji was structured in the 90s, before my arrival, actually, they had a strong consumer business, which mainly was floppy disk. In fact, an interesting story how to connect the dots again. In 1993, BASF had a facility in Bedford, Massachusetts, very close to Boston, where we actually created, together with Fujifilm, a joint venture called BNF Microdisc, manufacturing floppy disk. That was in the early 90s, 93, still a major business, especially in the data storage industry. Beside that, Fuji had a tape business for the broadcast business. So with a broadcast, supporting Sony's Betacam business, and eventually Panasonic's DVC business. And the retail business with floppies. In 1990, I think it was 1994, Fuji took over the BASF part of the B&F microdisc in Bedford and took over the entire facility, manufacturing floppy disk. Now, Fuji always had based on their history, it's all about coding. It's 80 years and more of coding technology. So what they did is, coding is, their bread and butter, and that's where they have the technology in. Tape, magnetic tape is nothing else than coding. So we have a history of coding, we have a experience in coding, and we are committed in technology, which was driving the next generation of tape. Now, Fujifilm developed metal particle, which was a successor of chromium dioxide. Smaller particles, higher density, higher capacity. This technology was applied in SIP technology for floppy disk and in DLT. That's how Fuji actually transitioned out of a pure, I would say, in the data storage industry, out of a pure consumer business, which was, purely floppy disk, into a tape business with DLT. They actually also supplied tape to IBM, to EMTEC, and to iMation at that time for the 3590 technology, which was a successor of 3480 and 90 technology. 10 gigabyte, a huge jump from 800 megabyte based on chromium dioxide to 3590, 10 gigabyte based on metal particle. They did not manufacture the cartridge, they supplied purely the tape to iMation and to EMTEC. EMTEC then started developing their own MP technology, and EMTEC, I was part of EMTEC at that time, we developed a so-called chlorine-free tape for 10 gigabyte tape for 3590, and then it became 3590 with 20 gigabyte. Fuji was not a manufacturer of this cartridge. EMTEC was supplying cartridges, 3480, 3490, 3590 to Fujifilm. iMation was the main competitor. At that time, actually going back in history, there were two other competitors for 3480 and 90, which purely went out of business based on technology. It was Graham and Anacom. They both were manufacturing 3480 and 90 technology, but they could not keep up with technology, especially in the investment in the technology when 3590 came alive and became more or less replaced 3480 and 90. Now, with Fuji's technology, metal particle technology, enabler for SIP technology on the consumer side, supporting DLT, very successful, supporting 3590 from a tape perspective, but then it was a transition when IBM started, developing and come up with a new format, so-called 3592 technology. 3592 replaced quickly as a format per se 3590. 3480 and 90 were almost dead at that time. Fuji decided to become a player in this field and not just supplying a tape, but they also became the manufacturer of the entire cartridges. And the major supplier to IBM, or the only supplier technically based on IPs and our technology, Fujifilm's technology, for 3592. That was the new value proposition. Now, with DLT, Fuji made a major step from the consumer business floppy, 3.5 floppy, with even SIP cartridges, floppy cartridges, into DLT, which became the mid-range product, a B2B product, supplying mainly to the aftermarket, to the retail channel. When I say retail, I mean resellers and distributor channel. and were very successful in this channel because technically there was no competition. It was Maxell and it was Fuji as a manufacturer, and we had Quantum as another brand. There were a couple of brands out, but Quantum was controlling the market price, which was questionable in terms of, antitrust issues, but I don't want to go into that debate. But Fuji transitioned clearly purely from retail floppy disk based on technology. So the vision was not who had the vision to move into the next generation. It was our R&D, our strong commitment to research and development and our capabilities in research and development to deliver a tape technology which were the enabler for future generations. And that was, I think, clearly our vision. Our vision goes back to R&D, to technology, investing in technology.
So do you recall or know of any of the key engineers or scientists who were involved in the development of Atom and then its application, first in ZIP and then in later?
I don't recall the names, especially, they were in Fuji Odawara in their facility, R&D facility. That was far before my time. I remember the next generation going from metal particle to barium ferrite, and here I know it's Mr. Higuchi, we call him Hunter, or the American name, I give him the name Barry because he was behind the invention of barium ferrite, so his American name is, for me, I call him Barry. He is clearly behind barium ferrite technology. But there are many hats. It's not one per se, it's one hat. There is a huge team behind the development of next, tape technology. And Fuji per se, you mentioned Kodak. Fuji was always committed, to invest in technology. We are spending a pretty significant amount of money. I always give presentations. We are spending over $1.5 billion per year in R&D. We are committed in the future. We are today, as Fujifilm, as the classic photo film business disappeared. We're doing less than 1% of our revenue is film these days, which was in 2000, around 2000 was the peak, over 50% of our revenue. And think about, we are a $24, $25 billion company these days. We are investing in different technologies, and we are achieving 80% of our revenue with products which we even haven't had 10 years ago. That tells you about diversification and have a vision investing into the future.
And being in the right investments. Atom was the right investment at the right time, as was later metal particle. There are examples of investments in technology that go no place, and you guys were either very lucky or very good or some combination to be through a couple of generations now at the right place. Is that, do you do wide varieties and then the old IBM method, you try 3 or 4 things and kill off the 3 that don't work and go with one? Or how does that work?
You can call it lucky or visionary. Based on our coating technology and recognizing that chromium dioxide had a limitation, Fuji came up with a technology, and that started much earlier than the commercialization of metal particle in the 90s, which then probably in 1996, SIP and DLT4 was based on metal particle. The development starts far earlier, recognizing the limitation of chromium dioxide. You can call it lucky, but it's also having a technology, providing a technology to hardware manufacturers. That's what we did, working closely at that time with IBM, working with Storage SIG closely to provide a solution, work closely definitely with Quantum, with DLT, providing a solution, to support their roadmap and what they want to do, growing capacity, supporting the exponential data growth. But what is even more important, you don't stop. You don't stop at metal particle. You look further out and see what is the next generation. And that's what Fuji did very well. They looked into this, looking at roadmaps and said, how far can metal particles support the roadmap? Because now you have published roadmap out which goes, at that time in the 90s when LTO was announced, up to 800 gigabyte. And then when LTO 3 was announced, they extended to LTO 8 with 12 terabyte. The question always is, what does it take to achieve 12 terabyte on a single cartridge? What technology can be applied? And it's particle technology, it's R&D, but also process technology. And I give you an example, we're talking about LTO8 now, perpendicular orientation to get higher density. But it's this vision of, and working on this, what can be, applied to support what is announced in terms of roadmaps, to support next generation of technology. And I believe that Fuji has a vision. I'm sure, I know that Fuji has a vision in supporting this, and it's driven, a lot is driven by management, by R&D, but the capability and the capability, the commitment to invest into this technology. And that's part of our value proposition. We are here to support, we are committed in future generations tape. We are committed, to invest heavily to support any roadmap published out in the industry. And we know what it takes to support. We knew there is a limitation to metal particle based on the properties. And when you make the metal particle too small, they lose their magnetic signal strength. So what is the next generation of particle? And Fuji came up with barium ferrite. We invented barium ferrite, which now is applied and even specified in generations from LTO 7 onwards. But we all know that even barium ferrite eventually has a limitation in the properties. So what is the next generation? And we are already developing, and we believe that probably LTO 10 will be strontium ferrite. So it's about the vision of where to go and what does it take to support this roadmap.
And without revealing trade secrets, I presume beyond particulate recording layers, you're looking at metal film recording layers as the ultimate areal density, like the hard drive guys are doing today.
We look at different technologies. But I can tell you, it's all about, at the end of the day, you have to be competitive in terms of other technologies. It's not about you, other media manufacturers. There are other technologies out, and you have to provide a storage medium which is cost competitive to other mediums. So we look at, we are open to look at all the different technologies, but we look at sputtering, but it's not, we at Fujifilm do not believe in sputtering, and it's mainly due to cost reasons. Yeah? It can be done, but it's not cost effective. And we are looking at exponential data growth. We have to store in the future zettabytes of data, not just, when we started, we looked at megabytes, we looked at gigabytes. Today we're looking at zettabytes. A zettabyte is 1,000 exabyte, and 1,000 exabyte is 1,000 petabytes. So it's 1,000,000 petabytes. It's a zettabyte. So we are looking beyond. What does it take to store the exponential data goes into the zettabytes, and you have to be cost effective, especially from a manufacturing perspective. And we at Fujifilm do not believe that sputter tape is the future. And we don't believe, I tell you, we don't believe in holographics. Holographics, as somebody famous said, holographics is and will always be the technology of the future. So we'll never come to life. We are interested in looking at, what today is DNA or 5D class. There are different developments out, but they are still, I would say, probably 15 to 20 years from commercialization. And then the question, at what cost can it be commercialized? So we have a solution out which enables companies to preserve their data and to support the exponential data growth.
Let's talk a bit about the dynamics of the cartridge market. You mentioned earlier that initially it starts as an OEM. The disk drive manufacturer, or the tape drive manufacturer, I should say, sells a bunch of cartridges with the drive, and then maybe sells the first few cartridges to the buyer of the drive. But ultimately it moves from an OEM sale on your part to a retail market sale, or at least a distributor, integrator resell. Back when I was in the cartridge business, I did some analysis of zip, for example, and sort of concluded over the life of a zip drive, it would absorb something on the order of 12 to 15 cartridges.
You know, we did this analysis years ago where we said how many cartridges per drive, and a drive cartridge ratio to determine what the market size is. But this is not really reliable because of different applications, whether you have it nearline or offline, and how you use it, and also on the capacity. That's not the way we're looking at it these days anymore. I remember very well that we looked at this 10 years ago, the attach rate. That's not really reliable anymore. That goes, at one time we said 40 to even 100 cartridges per drive. But it's all about even including migration. But I want to answer this question slightly different. And I know my people always, I come up with one example. And when we talk about the hardware manufacturers attaching media versus the aftermarket in the retail channel, think about the tire manufacturer for a car. So a car manufacturer, good German car manufacturer like Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Volkswagen, and even the Americans, they sell the car with the tires, correct? So that's where you attach. The tire manufacturer deliver the tires to the car manufacturer, and they deliver the car to you as a consumer with the tires. So that's what we like to do with the hardware. Get the first library out, tape library out with the cartridges. That's a market which is not accessible for a media manufacturer, because this is supplied by the hardware. The tire manufacturer can't sell a tire without a car, so the car needs to be supplied first. Now, if you drive your car and you get a good mileage on your tires, you're very happy to go back to the same tires you had and buy the same tires through the store, the Mavis store, wherever you buy your tires. That's the same idea we have in our industry. If the customer is happy with the cartridge, with the performance, the quality, then they go and buy the same cartridge again because it's a reliability factor. So you go out and say, hey, I had an IBM cartridge or even a Fuji branded cartridge in my library when it was supplied first. Where can I buy this? So now the market's shifting then to the aftermarket, but what we try to do is we try to make sure that, and part of the strategy is supply a good quality cartridge with a good service to the hardware manufacturers, that they bundle it with the hardware, sell it to the customer, the end user. And now the end users, they either go back to the hardware manufacturer to get, or they go to the aftermarket. In the aftermarket now, it's far more crowded, the market, because now you have all the media manufacturers or all the different brands in the market competing for their share. This market was driven for many, many years, starting with LTO1 by overcapacity, significant overcapacity, which drives the price down. There's a bargaining power, you want to utilize your capacity, so that's in the aftermarket where it's very crowded, it's all about the last 5 cents. And the price comes down dramatically. But before the market moves to the aftermarket, where it's very competitive and hardly to make any money, it stays for, typically a year in the hardware channel before actually the customer rebuys and goes to the aftermarket, get a better price. So that's where we try to take advantage, where we try to leverage. And then I remember when I became responsible for the entire business, I went to a distributor, and the distributor told me and said, I sell what the customer want or where I have the highest margin. So they are not actively, promoting a brand or a quality or a certain value proposition because they don't have the time and the knowledge to promote. They are purely selling, where they have the highest margin on or what the customer asks. So that's why we changed Fujifilm. We changed our strategy, and we sell a value proposition now to our customers. We do tape evangelism. We talk about the advantage of tape. We're talking about our value proposition so that the end user, the customer, actually eventually goes to the reseller or the distributor and specifically asks for Fuji branded cartridges. Why? Because we sell a value proposition. We tell the end user where the value is, where the value proposition is. That's how we try to stimulate the business, especially trying to make sure that there's a value in buying Fuji branded or actually Fuji manufactured tape.
The analogy, of course, is I buy Michelin tires for my car, regardless of what I get when I buy the new car. The first time the tires buy out, I buy Michelin because they have a great value proposition.
Easy.
But see, that goes to share more than total market, right? I mean, the market for tires, aftermarket for tires is sort of dependent upon the number of miles driven per year per car and retirement of cars.
And how many cars are sold?
The first set of tires comes with the car sold, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the next set of tires are sold on that car, depending upon how many miles. So the total market is, in fact, dependent upon new sales and retirements of cars. And that sort of gets to the same total market analysis for, or maybe not. Maybe it's really driven by data growth and affordability of data. And your market growth is not so related to the tape drive business. Interesting, dynamic question.
No, Tom, I think it's a very good question. In fact, I think there are a couple of components here, is driving this. Data growth is one component, clearly. But it's all about, and we call it tape evangelism. We try to educate our customers in what the best way of storing data. And I make it always very clear, we're not competing against HDD. That's based on application. There is a natural way of tiering. Famous people like Fred Moore, whom you know well as well, started with a pyramid. It's a tiering pyramid where we talk about the different tiers. It depends on how hot or how cold your data are, how often and frequently you access data. So it's all about the application. Disk has an advantage over tape, and tape has an advantage over disk. It depends on the time and the life cycle of the data and how often you access data. You don't cold data which you never access. It doesn't make sense to keep them on disk, which use power and spin for 24/7. You want to put it on another tier. It's all about optimization in your storage environment, and tape plays an important role in your storage environment. And now it's all about educating your customer what the best practice is. Fred Moore, and not just Fred Moore, everybody says about 60% of existing data are cold data. Cold data never accessed after 30, 60, or 90 days. What do you do and where do you store your data? What is best practice? And that's where we try to educate customers. And that's part of how we try to increase the market beside the exponential data growth in general.
I'd like to back up a little bit now to your BASF EMTEC experiences, and particularly the time at which you became the business manager, and I guess it spun out as a separate entity.
So in 90, 1992, BASF bought from Agfa the magnetic tape activities. And they combined it into a subsidiary, a BASF subsidiary called BASF Magnetic GmbH. That goes back to 1992. I was part of BASF for many years on the financial side. I joined, as I pointed out, in July 92, BASF Magnetics, when they, GmbH, when they spun off. I was responsible for the SAP implementation. Before, in 1993, I became the controller of the entire company. The company, BASF Magnetics, together with the Agfa activities, were very strong in VHS tape, video tape. We manufactured millions of VHS cartridges for the consumer. We manufactured a significant amount of, we call it duplicator tape, for duplicators like Technicolor or Deluxe, who put video on VHS tape. That was a significant business. Another business was broadcast business. We did, and were very strong in audio and video broadcast. Relatively strong. We're strong on the audio side. Major competitors at that time was Ampex, who then became famous name, especially here in the Valley, which then eventually became Quantity. So it was BASF and Ampex and Quantity who were on the audio side. BASF also was supporting the Sony formats like the Betacam. And then we had a relatively small business on the data storage side, which I was running, became the head, the business unit leader in 1996, the data storage business. And we manufactured at that time, on the consumer side, we had our floppy disk, and we were I would say, the major supplier, the market leader in we call it the cookies, the inside of the floppies. We supplied this around the world to all the Chinese companies, the Taiwanese companies, the Indian companies, like Mosabea and CMC in Taiwan. Many companies in China started, there was no barrier of entry to manufacture floppy disk. We supplied the cookies, which, the metal particle.
Before you continue the evolution, I just thought I'd remark that sounds remarkably like FUJIFILM's situation 10 or so, 20 years later. Big retail consumer business, a small computer business, and didn't make the transition. I'd also note in my research when BASF set up the Willstadt plant in 1966, you were a mere child, and they had projected that computer tape would be 30% of their business going forward. It sounds like they never got to 30% of the business by the time you got there.
I probably missed the heydays in that business, clearly. At one time, I think Willstadt was manufacturing 3480 and 3490 cartridges. Everything was fully automated. I think it was a state-of-the-art facility. Everything, we did about 18 million 3480 and 90 cartridges. We had a market share of over 30%. But it was relatively small. I think the business was dominated by clearly VHS. And VHS was not the technology of the future. It was a retail. I don't think in retail and consumer business you make enough margin to be able to invest in future technologies.
Why? I mean, that's interesting because it came that way, right? All of this industry started in the consumer business. Well, maybe you can argue it started in videotape, but the fundamental technologies came out of not computer. It was audio and video, then led to computer, and now computer can't support audio video, or audio video has just been replaced by other technologies?
I would say that it all depends on the barrier of entry. And VHS was a technology which was even manufactured by Korean companies. So it's all about capacity, or I would say overcapacity. It's consumer driven. If you go back, and I remember in the early 80s, a Betacam, Sony format Betacam, there was two formats for videotape was competing. It was Betacam, it was Video 2000 with the Philips format, and it was the VHS format. The VHS succeeded. It was not necessarily the best format, but the way it was promoted was eventually succeeded. A VHS cassette in early 1980s was about, to convert that into dollar, was about $20 to $25 per VHS cartridge. At the end, you were able to buy a VHS cartridge for less than $1. So tell me where you make money on this. It was driven by the Koreans. They dumped the tape into the market. They only have one vision, and this is being the market leader. Whether you make money or not, the Koreans are driven by capacity and market share at that time. They haven't really had a good brand. There was no something existed. The Korean brands at that time in the 80s and 90s were cheap. But they were not just cheap in terms of, they had no brand recognition, but also they were very, very inexpensive the way they supplied. And they destroyed the market. There were hardly any margins left in this business, in the consumer business. So the question is, it was a business which drove millions of cartridges, cassettes, VHS cassettes per year. But can you survive just by supplying quantities? Now, and then it becomes a management topic where what is the next technology? And what came out in the mid-90s, 95, 96, was optical. It was CDR, replacing audio, and it was a massive growth. But I remember the EMTEC management, top management at that time, didn't believe, because it cannot be what they don't want to be. It's always a strategy, I think, denying where the future is, because this is not supporting what we are doing. So if you close your eyes and not investing into where the future goes, then you're out of business. The last man standing it's not a good business model. So that is what drove EMTEC technically out of business. Beside some management, I would say, mistakes within the leverage buyout, by not understanding that you have to pay your bills quarterly to the banks. And that is, how do you pay it? You pay it from your profit. If you don't have bottom line profit, you can't pay your bills. If you can't pay your bills, what is the conclusion? You're out of business eventually.
To your point, I think the first floppy disk was priced at $5 a disk, and by the 80s, you got them free in the mail.
You know what killed us, and some companies started the rebate system, the mail-in rebate. I remember that actually technically killed the industry. You bought the floppy disk, and you had a mail-in rebate system where you technically got the price back by mailing it back and getting the rebate. You can't sell for free. I remember, it's a funny story, optical disc came. And at the beginning there was a significant shortage on CDRs. So you couldn't supply the market, the price was very high. One CDR was sold for $10 at the beginning. Suddenly the market came down because capacity suddenly ramped up. And with capacity, the price dropped faster than you could believe. I remember Taiyo Yuden, who was the inventor of optical disc, said at one time, you cannot manufacture an optical CD for less than $1.
How many dollars?
$1. That was the bottom line for manufacturing at one time. That's what they said. They were sold for pennies at the end. But with the market, there was a shortage. Suddenly we had products. But with products in our warehouse, the market price came down. The market price came down faster than, what came even below our cost, what we purchased it for. I went to Staples, and Staples made me an offer and said, they called it opportunity inventory. And they gave me a deal and said they buy a 10-pack for me for $30. But I have to provide a $30 mail-in rebate. Now, the question is, you can now calculate how much is coming back in mail-in rebates. But also I had to buy out the existing brand in their shelf. And I went out of this without having the deal. I refused the deal. And somebody said, the people, when you sit in the Staples parking lot, the people who come out and cheering, these are the people who didn't get the deal. The people who are sweating and crying, these are the people who got the deal because they don't know how to finance the deal. So this is retail. Retail can be a very brutal business. And optical quickly took over clearly the floppy disk business, very successful, but also took over the VHS business. DVD then came in and killed really from one day to the other, overnight, the VHS business. Our top management said, can never happen because of all the VHS recorders penetrated in the market. But it happened. It happened quick, very, very quick. And it killed the VHS business, the retail business, but also the duplicator business. And with that, you can't pay your bills. That's why EMTEC eventually went down and went bankrupt.
I mean, that is the story of the industry. I think there were, by my count, there were 30 tape drive companies at its peak around 1985, thereabouts, and it's down to one.
It's all about, it repeats, it's all about capacity, it's all about technology, and staying in the market, being able to invest into the future, making money. It's not just making money to become rich, making money to be able to invest in the technology.
Well, I guess your experience in the tape media business is that the transition in technology was rather straightforward. You didn't go into making optics, for example, with different technology. You were able to continue to invest in your technology, and the products evolved from the retail VHS floppy with a small computer to a very large computer, maybe not a very large. I mean, the revenues today adjust, how do they stand compared to when you were a more retail consumer than you are a computer?
I would say our revenue is growing. However, when I came to Fuji, we had a consumer division, we had a broadcast division, and we had the computer division. The consumer division, we divested quickly because we couldn't make money. It was mainly selling CDs, CDRs, DVDs. You buy and sell. It's not a business model you want to be in, especially not in the US retail channel with all the rebates and all the chargebacks especially. Customers, like a Walmart, they don't even pay you in full. They always have some chargebacks, and managing the chargeback, it's a totally different, another story. But one thing, we always look at different technologies. We looked at optical. Fuji made development and research in optical. We developed a die which we supplied to major manufacturers of optical, but we were never really in the optical business because the barrier of entry is too low. If the barrier of entry is too low, everybody can make it. If everybody can make it, you face overcapacity. And it's was very clear. If you look at the companies who did floppy disks in the early 90s became the companies in the late 90s who did CDs, CDRs and DVDs. The CMC, the Ritex in Taiwan, the Moser Bears in India, all driven by overcapacity, low cost, and eventually the price, the retail price for you were able to buy a CDR by far for pennies, far less than $1, what Taiyun projected as the bottom manufacturing cost. The price came down because the Chinese, Taiwanese, Indian companies went in, just massive, and the barrier of entry, there was no barrier of entry technically, from a technology perspective. So Fuji did not, and that is, I think, the smart part. You take a strategic bet, but we are not investing into technologies which has no barrier, because that's not an area where you make money eventually.
So the three divisions, the consumer division was basically a reseller buying blank and relabeling it and selling it, and that's a very low margin business, but there's also no technology investment. Your VHS or video business, technology investment, probably much bigger than the computer business in that time period?
So Fuji was clearly in the VHS, in the VHS business, but as the market came down and optical took over, we divested in this business again. I think, yes, it's a coding technology, but Fuji at that time already invested and clearly supported MP and was in the data storage business with DLT. So we divested the retail business, completely went out of the retail. When I came in 2004, we made a decision to go out actually in 2000, completely going out in 2008 out of the retail business.
So how much did your revenues go down when you divested? How big, more or less? I'm not looking for detailed numbers, but was your business cut in half? Quarter?
No, it wasn't cut in half. It was, I would say, maybe 25%. We cut that business, but we became more profitable because the 25% revenue as a percent, top line revenue, contributed a huge loss to the bottom line. So you have to look at it from a business model, and again, it becomes handy that you understand numbers and know how to improve numbers. So we looked at this and did a restructuring. We divested the retail business, which was not profitable. We had a significant amount of chargebacks, which we had to clear. I think it was the best decision we were able to make at that time. I'll give you an example, just the opposite. Imation, who was a spin-off from 3M from 1996, they were not able to invest in tape technology, in coating technology. They were not able to keep up in terms of R&D, but also process technology. What they did is they suddenly invested into the retail business. They bought Memorex brand. They bought a couple of other optical brands. They became the major supplier of optical. But what killed optical? It was flash. Flash, the iPod. The iPod in 2003 changed completely the market. Yeah? And now you're sitting on a business which is dying, like optical business. What is your future? I know that Imation then went into a marketing and distribution company, brand marketing and distribution company. They wanted to support this. They distributed IBM, they distributed for storage tech, but you're not in control of your own destiny. If one of these companies decide, to go a different route, you're out of business. So eventually, the problem is the market is changing, and if you're not prepared to the changes, then you're always running behind.
My recollection is, and I'll correct the numbers if I'm wrong, that Imation paid something close to $100 million for the Memorex brand and ultimately sold it for $6 million.
I think the recollection is wrong. I think they more or less sold my understanding is more like $400 million.
I'm sorry?
They paid more like
400 million?
400 million.
You could be correct. And I think they sold it for something on the order of 6 or 9. It was not a great business deal.
They had a couple of strategic bets we didn't pay out. They invested in technologies like they wanted to compete against Iomega SIP. They came up with the LS120, which never took off. So they did a couple of strategic bets, which it's fine to take a strategic bet, but eventually some have to pay off. And nothing paid off here, really. So I think they went out of business eventually as a result. I think there are many examples, if you're not able to make money and to invest, you're out of business.
So, I mean, that's what to me is really unique about the Fujifilm story. So you guys made it. We've talked about most everybody in the coating business didn't, starting with maybe a dozen or 2 dozen companies at its peak. And, the vision that enabled you to get through, it sounds like, is the continuous investment in technology and being with the right technology at the right time, perhaps being the luck part of that story.
It is enjoyable working and being with the market leader, especially when it comes to technology. Clearly, it's enjoyable. I tell you, it's much easier being with a company who has a leading technology and is committed to the future technology. It makes life easier.
And the key event was Atom.
Yes, MP.
And then MP.
Metal particle atom technology.
But if it wasn't for Atom, there might not have been an MP. I mean, it sounds like in listening to your history of the industry, the really key transitions, there was a chromium dioxide transition. I mean, we started with iron oxide, right?
Yeah.
Rust.
Correct.
Chromium dioxide.
But even MP is an oxide.
I'm sorry?
Even MP is an oxide.
Oh, yes. That's, to me, that's always been the strength of media. Your recording medium is already rusted or turned into a stable
Rust
particle.
No,
as a metal particle may not be so stable, but certainly the oxides and ceramics are much more stable than pure metal.
Yes, in general you're right, and I would say to your earlier comment, Atom was based on metal particle. It's not, I think you have to look at it together. Atom is MP technology, called Atom technology based on Fujifilm's technology, was clearly the game changer. And that was, I don't know how many years it was in the making. Typically, I think probably 10 years before it commercialized, we developed on metal particle with some experience in other areas. But it was, for the storage industry, clearly a game changer. And I remember sitting on the other side of the table, at that time with EMTEC, I know that Fuji had the best tape solution. IBM recognized this. IBM only worked based on the history with 3480 and 3490 and even 3590 with Imation and EMTEC. But they recognized that Fuji has a superior tape technology.
But that was chromium dioxide.
3480 and 90. 3590 was MP already, but in the early stage supplied as a tape from Fujifilm. So every 3590 in the first years supplied by Imation or EMTEC was supplied from a tape perspective from Fujifilm. So they were the tape manufacturer. We put this in the cartridge, and we started, actually, interesting enough, was with 3590 servo track writing started, which was not applied for the 3480 and 3490. The track density became far more precise. So when you had an open reel tape, think about the history of open reel tape. It was called early the 7-track or the 9-track tape. It was all half-inch, and it was 7 tracks on a half-inch tape. It became a 9-track tape with 200 megabyte. That was in 1951. When you go back now and look at this from 1951 to 1983, when IBM put the open reel finally in a cartridge, was called the magnetic tape cartridge. Still 200 megabyte, it was 18 tracks. A huge jump from 9 tracks, we doubled from 9 tracks within 35 years. We doubled the tracks. Great improvement. Now, if you look at the jump now to, that was 1983, 1980, I think 86, 87, the 3490 was developed, and it jumped to 800 megabyte and 36 tracks. So again, we doubled from 36 tracks to, from 18 tracks to 36 tracks. That was based on chromium dioxide.
I can hand you a foil from one of your presentations.
Yeah, thank you.
That might help you walk through your aerial density or track density.
Yeah, so it's the 3490, 36 tracks, as I said, 800 megabyte. In 1995, the magnetic tape cartridge 3590, famous as Maxstar, came out with 128 tracks and 10 gigabyte. But what was the enabler? What enabled the jump from 800 megabyte really to 10 gigabyte? It was metal particle. We changed from chromium dioxide to metal particle. And technology-wise, we started servo riding. The track density became much denser, and we changed from 36 to 128 tracks. Now, LTO1 started with 100 gigabyte. When you look at the Maxstar 3590 with 10 gigabyte, or eventually actually 20 gigabyte, the LTO1 with 100 gigabyte and 384 tracks. Now, and I just make that long story short, today we are at 8,704 tracks on a 20 terabyte IBM 3592 JE media, which, just to put that in a perspective, that's equivalent to 79 tracks on a single strand of human hair. That's how technology is evolving. Yeah.
And where's it going? It's still a half inch.
So I give you, thank you for this, that is a great leeway. When you think 79 tracks on a human's hair or 8,704 tracks on a half-inch tape is a lot, look at, and you're coming from the HD business, HDD has about 250,000 tracks on a half-inch, comparable. They have 500,000 on a square inch, 500,000 tracks on a square inch, which, just make it simple, is about 250,000 on a half-inch. This relates to over 1,000 tracks on a single human's hair. Compared to 79, that's pretty damn good. Now, put that in perspective. This shows you the opportunity tape has in terms of density, aerial density, track density. There's a long way to go to grow. Yeah?
So, Peter, we've talked about track density and where we've been and where we're going. Can you expand, talk a little further about where you think the tape industry is going, particularly in the context of flat revenue, declining unit volume, and a company with 2 media suppliers and 1 drive supplier? You going to be around 30 years from now?
Yes. A very clear statement. That's the way I look at it, and that's my prediction. Prediction could be wrong.
Of course.
But my prediction clearly is that we are around. And in general, I would say there are a couple of reasons why. And I would like to go just, when we talked about track density and we talked about HDD, over 1,000, currently over 250,000 tracks on a half inch. while tape is still on just 8,700. It's still a huge number, but still on 8,704 tracks, to be precise. There is huge room for improvement. And I would say there is, on tape, no technology limits, per se. So we have a long way to go in terms of areal density and track density compared to other technologies. Now, the other question is, you asked me about, declining numbers of cartridges. But what we clearly see and what we don't necessarily see a significant growth in terms of units shipped, but what we see is a significant growth in capacity shipped. So that underlines, what we're all talking about, the exponential data growth. And we believe that the exponential data growth, IDC is predicting that we're going to 175 zettabytes in 2025. Now, this is all data created. When we talk about persistent data, we're talking about we are roughly at all data currently, stored, different formats, roughly 1 zettabyte. IDC predict that we are at 7.5 zettabytes, and all the analysts, support the 7.5 zettabytes in 2025. So within the next 6 years, that is a compound average growth rate of 35%. Very significant. To support this, you need to grow capacity per cartridge. Otherwise, you won't be able to handle the capacity and manage the capacity and the data overall. And tape has no technology limits in terms of density, track density, and areal density. So a great format to store. That's why I believe that tape will be around for a long time. There is currently no other technology on the horizon.
I know you're a finance and CEO type, and maybe it's unfair to throw a technical question at you, but there may be no immediate limits on the size of the recorded spot, but can you get your head close enough, reliably enough, and long enough to those spots to be viable at those much higher densities?
You're right. I'm not that deep into technology, but I would say from what I know, what I hear from our experts, and what I understand, yes, we can. And it's all about the interesting part. It's not just the tape technology; it is the interface with head technology. So it's not just tape can grow, and yes, tape has room and grow in areal density, especially compared to HDD, but it grows along with other technologies, especially the head technology. So as head technology is moving from MR heads to GMR heads, now to TMR heads, we have shown that there are solutions to this and opportunities lay ahead of us.
Well, I don't want to be argumentative, but the same head is already in the disk drive, hard disk drive, reading that spot or writing that spot. So but in the disk drives, they have a very controlled head disk and head disk spacing. And in tape, which is essentially a noodle as opposed to a disk, the spacing may not be as well controlled, which leads to issues of can you read or write the spot and will it wear? And so the issue is, you may not have a magnetic reading or writing technical barrier, but maybe, and I honestly don't know, there is possibly a mechanical barrier coming that may limit you from going as far as the magnetics could go.
You're completely right. I think that is a challenge and can be a challenge, but that's what our experts are working on. The interesting part is, as you just said, the TMR heads, I think the disk industry is working with this technology for almost 10 years now. But with the expertise they have, moving that into the tape technology, I think it's even an advantage for us. We know what it takes. Yes, there is a spacing issue. I think the heads are flying, and it's not touching, while on the tape, it's there is some interface. So there is clearly, a spacing issue and could be a spacing issue, but again, this is, the interface between tape technology make the tape smoother. Yeah, what does it take? Smaller particles, finer particles, make the tape smoother, and solves eventually the spacing issue.
So you don't see any issues in the near future that your technologists are worrying you about?
It's interesting. I don't see necessarily in the near future an issue, and I especially don't see an issue or a problem which can't be solved. It's more, at the end of the day, it's more, is there a way to combining to some extent the tip and the disc technology in terms of when we talk about head technology? Yeah? How to apply the head technology from a disc on the tip technology?
Well, I hope we're both here 30 years from now to see how your predictions come out.
I'm very curious to see that.
And I'm curious what you think about whether the data will still be around 30 years from now.
You know, if you would have asked me that question 30 years ago, who would have thought that what the World Wide Web, you know, what that even is? You know, I remember when the World Wide Web was introduced and somebody said you can go in the Library of Congress and more or less get access to every single book. It was unbelievable. This is an event which changed the entire world. Yeah, the email changed the world. Yeah, it's you know what and how the world is changing. You know what events occur in the next 30 years, 50 years. You know, who would have thought that we are moving from paper completely from paper to emails, from punch cards to tape. I think if we would have always known, and we know, you know, we have seen, you know, where the future is going, we, you know, would have been much better in our strategic bets, to, you know,
well,
be prepared.
I think you've referred to something you call a digital dark age, as we're in it, and 30 years from now we may be deeper in it. What is the digital dark age?
So the digital dark age is clearly, you know, some experts refer to the digital dark age that we know about the 21st century less than what we know about the 20th century. And the main reason is, in the 20th century, everything was born analog, was paper, let's take pictures as an example. Today, in the 21st century, everything is born digital, lives digital, and eventually dies digital. And I give you a great example. When you come home Christmas, you know, and the family sits around the Christmas tree, and you open your photo book and you look at through the pictures you got, you know, from the last vacation, who is opening, you know, the smartphone, whether it's the iPhone or the Samsung smartphone, and show all the pictures they have taken during the year? So everything stays on your computer. You don't archive your pictures. You don't go and sort your pictures anymore. So content, you know, lives, born digital, lives digital, and dies eventually digital. And that is a challenge. And that's, you know, it's a phenomena which we have to deal with. And we have to make sure that we save our data. And I would say, to close this loop, tape is a perfect, you know, solution to, you know, to solve the problem, the phenomenon of the digital dark age, because you need a reliable, safe, cost-efficient solution, which also, you know, you have to migrate. We talked about migration. So we have a roadmap on tape which you can migrate. And that tape is a perfect solution, you know, to prevent the digital dark age. Because, just, I think very important, we have a social responsibility to preserve the digital content, the knowledge of the sum of our knowledge for future generations. Yeah.
Interesting perspective. It does require you and I to make use of the cloud, because we're not going to have a tape drive in our house.
You have a hybrid solution. I think as a consumer, you don't have a tape drive at home, but you have, yes, you have your disk at home, and yes, you have your cloud at home. That's for the consumer, like you and me. How do we store our digital content these days? Yeah, I think you don't store it on one format only and take the risk that it dies. You back it up and archive in different areas, and not just everything at home. You know, you might have two solutions, but you keep everything at home. No, but now look at companies with their responsibility, and yes, companies move into the cloud and more get stored in the cloud, but they have a hybrid solution. And interesting enough, I remember somebody asked me and said, doesn't the cloud kill the tape business? No, it creates tape business. Yeah? There are so many data, back up or archive in the cloud on tape. Yeah? You believe we had this conversation. You said you're not using the cloud. Everybody's using the cloud one or the other way. Whether it's you don't even know where you're using the cloud. And I think the best example is your emails. Your Gmail it's a Google email is in the cloud.
Well, I think earlier on you mentioned total data generation as some number of zettabytes, only a small percentage of which is actually reduced to digital or stored as digital.
Stored. So
Yeah.
I think the sum of data we are creating is predicted to be growing in 2025 up to 175 zettabytes. The one we are really, the persistent data we are really storing is projected at about 7.5 zettabytes. So a small portion of what we are really creating data.
So most data is ephemeral anyhow, it goes away.
Many data are not stored, go away, but even 7.5 zettabyte or 7 to 8 zettabyte went this way. I think that's just a prediction. That's a significant growth in data. And what is driving? I think who would have thought when the iPhone came out? I remember Steve Ballmer made a prediction in 2007 that the iPhone will never have a success story. How wrong was he? And he's a great name in the industry. Yeah. So there are predictions. I remember the founder of 3Com made a prediction that the World Wide Web will go quickly supernova in 1996. We don't know where the world is going, and it's changing rapidly and fast. But we can be sure of one thing, that change is persistent. Consistent, change. We will always look at changes.
I'd also note that you may be able to archivally store the data on persistent memory like tape, but if the application doesn't exist, when you read it back, it will be gibberish unless you have a lot of money to rewrite the application or there's some sort of translator. So you need a Rosetta Stone to read Word 1 documents today.
It's all about, I would say migration is key. Yeah? And that's why the roadmap is so important. And that's the other advantage of, tape technology per se, because we have a roadmap which supports the growth, the data growth. And yes, you have to migrate eventually.
But that may preserve the digital information, but I recently tried to read a Word 1 document in Microsoft Word 2010, and it was it was there, but it was a bit of an archival. It was a bit of a resurrection to find the data amidst all the other symbols.
But again, it's about migration. It's technology migration in general. It's not just the tape migration, technology migration per se.
But as I said, I think some of the more modern formats for the storage of information are so ubiquitous that they will be readable 30 years from now, like PDF. PDF may be at version 100, but you'll still be able to read version 8. There will be a translator.
Yeah.
But who knows? We're just predicting. Anything else you want to talk about the future? I want to have a retrospective question.
I would say in general the future is bright. We talk about digital transformation, which is unlimited. And I think tape in general has a renaissance and is going through the renaissance. Tape was supposedly dead for many years. I know that EMC at one time came out and said, the slogan tape is dead. I would say tape is going through a renaissance. There are applications, there's nothing, I think it's not about tape versus disk and other technology. It's about complementary. It's all about storage optimization.
Okay. Back when you joined Fujifilm, we talked about 3 divisions.
Yeah.
I believe a broadcast division, a consumer vision, and then the data storage division. You hived off the consumer division very early, was losing money. At that time, I thought I asked you the question of, well, then what was the ratio between broadcast and computer? And I thought you said 25% was broadcast, but maybe you meant 25% was consumer.
So just give you a little bit of a breakdown. Then we talk about the 3 divisions within recording media, especially here in the United States. But we had about 25% consumer business in terms of top-line revenue, 25% for broadcast, and 50% was data storage. And that mainly consists of LTO, DLT, and enterprise. At that time it was IBM Enterprise 3592, and it was Storage Tech, Sun, or now Oracle T10000 technology. Now, the consumer business, we divested in the consumer business. Top line revenue is one thing, bottom line profit, there was no profit. It was technically, generating more a loss to our bottom line overall P&L. So we divested in this business. We didn't see the future, especially not in optical. We also sold some USB, which are now giveaways, more or less. And that flash technology is very difficult if you're just kind of a reseller and not a manufacturer, because capacity is growing faster than and the price comes down. You can't sell all technologies. So we divested in this part of the business. But then on the broadcast side, the market changed completely. And the main trigger for this, the broadcast business was always dominated by Sony. Sony has the formats like the Betacam, the Betacam SX, the HDCam SR business. They had some Sony had some proprietary formats like HDCam SR. And so Sony was very dominant on the hardware side and clearly on the broadcast, on the media side. There were 2 other manufacturers. It was EMTEC was at one time manufactured, but it was mainly then Sony and Fujifilm with relatively small market shares. It was still a very nice, sizable business for us, very profitable as well. But Fuji and Maxell, we had rather small market shares. You might remember in 2011, March 9th, 2011, a major earthquake followed by a tsunami hit Japan. And Sony's facility in Sendai, north of Tokyo, close to Fukushima, the tsunami completely, I would say destroyed their production facility, flooded it and destroyed the coating. And Sony was out of the business for probably roughly 9 months. What happened is that they had proprietary products like HDCam SR, and they had market shares of 80% on HDCam and significant market and manufacturing shares on Betacam, and they couldn't supply. So companies were desperate to get product, which they couldn't get. So they had to find different solutions. And when companies are under consumers or under pressure, they find solutions. And there was a solution, especially on the broadcast side. Camera started using flash. They backed it up on the server, and eventually, instead of having the archive on videotape like Betacam, where everything was actually archived on videotape, was suddenly archived on data tape. So there was a transformation in terms of, the tsunami triggered a quick transformation. And technically, videotape is completely dead, and we stopped manufacturing videotape, and we are, since I would say 2017, we stopped manufacturing broadcast tape and selling broadcast tape because the market more or less disappeared, which was a nice, profitable business unit within our segment, as one of our segments. But you can only imagine how Sony was hit by this change in market. So from a proprietary product, now going back to a data tape with LTO, always LTO, or 3592.
So as a finance guy, I'm sure you understand the fixed cost allocations issues when you lose half your business, right? You have even though that half your business may not have been profitable, it still was absorbing a fixed cost. Now that fixed cost has got to be absorbed by half the business. Somehow you managed through that.
Yes, and I think it's you're right. As a finance guy, you look at this and you take actions, and you take actions early enough. We have a German saying. It's more or less, you fix the roof before the rain starts. When the rain starts, it's too late. You have a hole in your roof, you get wet. So you try to fix it before the rain starts. So what you do is you fix your organization before you start scrambling here with business change. You have to do certain predictions. Just before I became the president, we actually did a spun-off. We were at one time, when I joined in 2004, the recording media was a division of FUJIFILM North America, and we spun off into FUJIFILM Recording Media U.S.A. We did a major restructuring, and we looked at the business from a different angle and make sure that we are able to serve the market. We are selling today more cartridges, and we're generating more revenue than in 2008, and we are shipping far more capacity than we did in 2008 with less people. So we are far more efficient in what we are doing, but that's what it takes to be, to support the market and the business. You have to react early enough.
It must have been a challenging period.
It is a challenging period, but when in 2008 the financial crisis hit, and everybody was struggling, and everybody tried to reorganize because businesses, lost revenue, and you had to restructure. There is a pain point, and you suddenly start quickly restructuring. And by the way, you stop as soon as the pain is over. We had done our homework, and I believe that it's my responsibility, it's management's responsibility to make always adjust to the change. And you have to predict the change, and you have to make immediate and constant changes. As the market is constantly changing, you have to make constant changes and adapt to the changes.
Any particularly interesting change you made at that time you'd like to share with us, or just a difficult time period?
It was a difficult time period, but we looked at this carefully because, you know what, I was almost when Fuji was very successful in the DLT days, I would almost say, and I wasn't part of this, so it's easy for me to say, I think we were almost we were very, very successful. It didn't matter whether we had how fat we were. The organization became fat and fatter. I think we gained more and more, it doesn't matter really, more people. But as the market is changing, you have to make sure that, that you adapt to the changes and make necessary adjustments. It is challenging, but it's part of our responsibility to make sure that you stay competitive in the market environment.
And you did.
And we did, yes. It's not me alone.
Anybody in the team that was particularly important in contributing to that?
Team. It's always a team effort. It's not me alone. I think I always say I only can be as good as the team is, and it's not just me.
So, Peter, you are here contributing to the record of history at the Computer History Museum. What does it feel like to be at the Computer History Museum?
To be honest, I'm honored. I'm very pleased and very happy to be here. I'm part of small, just a few years. 25 years is a small part of history in general. But I'm very happy that something like this museum exists, where we preserve the history for future generations to come, because we are in the tape industry. I'm per se, focusing on media, and I would say the kids today don't know anything about this. I'll give you an example. Whenever I come through immigration and the immigration officer asks you, what are you doing for a living? And I say, I'm selling tape. And they said, what? Tape is still around? Tape alive? And I say, yeah, tape is, we're still selling tape. The interesting part is that the generations, the younger generations never really touched tape. We all, I think the older generations, one or the other way we touched tape. We had our audio recorder, audio tape, consumer tape. We had our VHS tape. We talked about this. So we all touched tape one or the other way. But the generations today, they don't even know anything about tape. They don't even know that tape is around. So we actually tried to educate. One of our friends and colleagues from IBM, Dr. Rick Bradshaw, a good friend of mine, we hired him to go to universities to educate the students about tape, because that's a technology they never touch and they're not aware of. So it is interesting to see how we need to educate what the technology is and deal with the technology. So this history museum here was focusing many years on hardware. And warehouses full of hardware and all the different, but now it's about digital transformation. And it's now not just the media, I'm happy to be here and talk about tape technology, which is part of the history, but it's not just, but also part of the future. But it's interesting to see and understand, how this actually helps to preserve, and do the digital transformation. And I go back to what we said before, the digital dark age. Here, this history museum, it prevents the digital dark age of the history in storage.
That is a great way to sum it up. Thank you very much for your time with us today, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Tom, I thank you for having me, and I'm really honored to be part of this. And I hope that my grandkids, as you said earlier, in the introduction, come back here and see what we're talking about. Very, very happy to be here. Thank you.